Welcome back to the deep dive. We're diving deep into the power of storytelling this time. I've got to say, this collection of articles and research you gave me, wow, it's fascinating. I'm hooked already.
Yeah, for me, I don't know, it's just amazing how much storytelling influences, well, everything, really.
Right.
It's not just entertainment, it's how we understand ourselves,
Yeah.
connect with other people, even like how we see the world. It's like almost like a fundamental human operating system.
I love that, a human operating system.
Yeah, yeah.
And, one article, it contrasts storytelling with like just straight facts and figures.
Right.
And it argues that stories they're stickier. We remember them better. Why do you think that is?
Well, think about how our brains work, right? Research shows that stories actually activate like different parts of our brains than when we're just taking in data.
Oh, interesting.
Like the amygdala, that's the part that handles emotions. That lights up when we're engaged in a narrative. So it's not just like logic. We're feeling the story, and that makes it stick.
So it's like stories have this emotional glue
Yeah.
that helps them just stay in our minds. And the source also talks about storytelling being a way to bridge gaps between people.
Yeah.
How does that actually work? Like practically?
Well, imagine you're listening to someone share a story about, I don't know, overcoming a challenge. You're not just getting information. You're experiencing it through their eyes, right?
Right,
And
yeah.
so suddenly, even if you come from totally different backgrounds, you find a connection, a shared human experience.
I see.
And that's empathy, right? That's the foundation of it.
Yeah, it's like when you read a book and a character's going through something and you think, wow, even though this is fiction,
Right.
I've totally felt that too. The source also talks about vulnerability in storytelling. And they actually mention how Emma, the host, she was really moved by her mentor's story of like career struggles. Why is vulnerability such a key ingredient, do you think?
Well, vulnerability is risky, right? Like
Yeah.
when someone shares a story where they're not perfect, where they struggled, it gives us permission to be imperfect too. Oh, that's a good point.
And so in that example, the mentor being honest probably made Emma feel less alone in her own challenges. And that creates a deeper connection than just like a success story would.
Absolutely. It's like, how's that saying go? People don't connect with perfection. They connect with authenticity.
Yeah, exactly.
And so the source then shifts gears a bit and talks about how we can use storytelling for like personal growth. It even suggests journaling as a tool.
Yeah, journaling can be so powerful for like reflecting on yourself. But when you write down your experiences, even small moments, you start to see patterns in your own life. It's like you're taking these scattered puzzle pieces and starting to fit them together, and you get a clearer picture of your own narrative.
Right. So it's not just about these big adventures.
Yeah,
It's
right.
about finding meaning in everyday life.
Exactly.
Okay, and then the source goes on to like professional applications of storytelling. And it even mentions Steve Jobs. Like he
Yep.
was a leader who clearly used stories so effectively. What do you think made his approach so impactful? I think Jobs understood that people don't buy products. They buy into emotions, into aspirations, right?
Yeah.
He rarely talked about like specs. He would weave narratives. Like think about that famous line, 1,000 songs in your pocket. That's not about storage space.
Yeah.
It's about the feeling of freedom, the possibilities.
You painted a picture, didn't he?
Exactly.
With his words. And the source also talks about the role of storytelling in personal branding. And it emphasizes the why, sharing your unique journey.
Yeah, your why is what sets you apart in a world that's just overloaded with information. People connect with, again, authenticity, with the human story behind, like the polished, perfect version. When you share your journey, the struggles, not just the good stuff.
Yeah.
It resonates on a deeper level.
It's like you're inviting people into your world, not just presenting this curated version of yourself, right?
Exactly.
And the source brings up this point about businesses using storytelling. I thought this was interesting. To create an experience around a product, can you give an example of what that actually looks like?
Sure. Like, think about those commercials that don't just list features, right?
Yeah.
They tell these mini stories. Maybe it's like, I don't know, a parent struggling to connect with their teenager, and then a game brings them closer.
I see.
And so you're not just buying the game, you're buying into that feeling of connection.
You're buying a feeling.
Right, exactly. That's experiential storytelling.
It's like they're selling an emotion
Yeah.
rather than just a thing. So we've seen how storytelling plays a role in like leadership, personal branding, even marketing. What other professional settings can benefit from it?
Pretty much any professional setting where communication is key.
Okay.
You know, whether you're pitching an idea to your team or presenting research findings, even just building rapport with colleagues, if you can weave in an anecdote,
Yeah.
something relatable, it can make your message stick, create a more engaging experience.
Yeah, it's like that old advice, show, don't tell.
Exactly.
A well-placed story can be so much more impactful than just like data and figures.
Absolutely.
And speaking of different ways to tell, the source mentions this distinction between like verbal storytelling
Right.
and written storytelling.
Yeah. So with verbal storytelling, you have immediacy, that back and forth with the audience. Like think about a comedian riffing off the crowd or, I don't know, a grandparent with a good bedtime story. It's dynamic.
So there's a spontaneity to it.
Yeah.
A real-time connection. What about written storytelling? What are its strengths?
I think written storytelling allows for a level of precision, like craft. It's harder to achieve that on the fly, you know?
Yeah.
You can carefully choose your words, the pacing, really like layer in meaning. Think about how a novelist can use imagery, metaphors to create a whole world in your mind.
It's like the difference between a live concert and a studio recording. They both have their own magic. And speaking of magic, what about visual storytelling? The source touches on like film and art, how those mediums convey narrative.
Visual storytelling often bypasses our logical filters and just goes straight for the emotional core.
Interesting.
You know, a single powerful image that can stay with you for years. And a well-crafted film scene can evoke feelings you might not even have words for.
Yeah, they say a picture is worth 1,000 words.
Right.
And of course, we can't forget how technology has changed everything. The source mentions how like podcasts and social media, even TikTok,
Yeah.
they've given a voice to so many people.
It's incredible. Like anyone with a smartphone can potentially reach, you know, a global audience with their story.
It's true.
It's both empowering and challenging, right? Because how do we navigate this like flood of narratives?
Yeah.
Which stories do we trust?
It's like we're in this vast ocean of stories.
Right.
And we have to learn how to navigate. Well, we've covered so much in this first part of our deep dive, from like the neuroscience of why stories stick with us to all the different ways storytelling shows up in our lives. Where do we go from here?
Well, in the next part, we'll go deeper into the psychology of storytelling. We'll explore how it shapes our beliefs, influences our emotions, even helps us heal from difficult experiences.
Wow, that sounds fascinating.
Get ready for some real mind-bending stuff. Welcome back to our deep dive on the power of storytelling. Last time, we talked about how stories stick with us, how they bridge gaps, even how they like influence our decisions. But I'm really intrigued by this idea of storytelling as like a human operating system.
Yeah, that metaphor really stuck with me too.
Right, like stories are the code that runs beneath the surface, influencing our thoughts, our beliefs, even our actions.
And speaking of influence, one article argues that we need to be more mindful of the stories we consume these days.
Oh, absolutely.
It's not just, passive entertainment anymore, is it?
No, not at all. We're constantly bombarded with narratives,
Right.
News, social media, advertising. They all have an underlying message, a perspective. And if we're not aware of that, well, we can end up internalizing beliefs that maybe don't even align with our own values.
Yeah, it's like we're constantly downloading software into our minds.
Right.
And some of it might be malware.
Exactly.
The source suggests becoming like a more critical consumer of stories.
Mm-hmm.
What does that look like, practically speaking?
Well, I think it starts with asking questions like, who's telling this story? What's their motivation?
Yeah.
Are they presenting a balanced view? Or is there like an agenda here?
Right.
And maybe most importantly, how does this story make me feel?
Oh, that's interesting.
Does it make me feel hopeful, fearful, angry? Those emotions, those are often a clue to the underlying message.
It's like being a detective, looking for clues to the bigger picture.
Exactly.
And one article we got even argues that being intentional about the stories we share is a form of self-care. That's a new thought for me.
It's fascinating, isn't it? Think about it. When we go through something difficult, our thoughts and feelings can get all jumbled up.
Mm-hmm.
But when we shape that experience into a story, whether we write it down or talk it out, it helps us make sense of it.
Oh, I see.
It's therapeutic.
So it's not just about sharing for an audience.
No.
It's about processing our own lives.
Exactly.
The source also mentions that sharing our stories with other people can be healing. Why is that?
I think vulnerability creates connection. When we share a story where, we're not perfect, where we struggled, and someone listens with empathy,
Yeah.
it breaks down those walls of isolation. We're not alone anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be incredibly powerful for healing, both for the person telling the story and the person listening.
It's like that moment when you realize, oh, other people feel this way too.
Right.
I'm not broken.
Exactly.
And the source goes on to explore this link between storytelling and empathy. That came up a bit in part 1 too.
Yeah. Oh yeah, stories are empathy machines. When we hear a good story, especially one that's different from our own experience, it's like we step into someone else's shoes, we feel what they felt, see the world through their eyes. That's how we build understanding and bridge those divides.
It's like that quote, don't judge someone until you've walked a mile in their moccasin.
Exactly.
Stories, let us do that, virtually.
Yeah.
The source also mentioned something I found really interesting, the idea that emotions are the heartbeat of a good story.
Think about the stories that have really stayed with you, the ones that still give you chills. I bet they all made you feel something. Joy, sorrow, fear, excitement. Those emotions are what make a story memorable. They make us care.
Yeah, it's like, how does it go? People will forget what you said, but they'll never forget how you made them feel.
Exactly.
Stories are powerful because they make us feel. And speaking of feelings, something we haven't really touched on is imagination. What's the role of imagination in all of this?
Imagination. That's where the real magic happens. A storyteller can provide the words, the framework.
Yeah.
But it's the listener's imagination that brings it to life. We fill in the gaps, picture the scenes, even create voices for the characters.
It's like a collaboration between the storyteller and the audience. And that's probably why the same story can affect different people in different ways based on their own experiences, their own imagination.
Yeah, precisely. And that brings us to a challenge that a lot of people face, the fear of sharing their own stories.
Right.
The source talks about this a lot, and for good reason. Why do you think so many of us hold back?
I think it comes back to vulnerability, which we've talked about a lot. It feels risky sharing our stories, especially the messy ones.
Yeah.
What if people judge us? What if we're not, good enough?
Yeah, it's natural to feel that way. We all have that inner critic whispering doubts, right? But the source has some great advice. Start small. Share your story with someone you trust, someone who will listen with kindness. It's about building confidence, realizing that our stories have value, even if they're not perfect.
It's like dipping your toes in the water before jumping in the deep end.
Exactly.
And on that note of diving in, the source also talks about focusing on connection over perfection.
Oh, perfectionism can be such a creativity killer. We get so caught up in wanting everything to be perfect that we end up sharing nothing at all.
Right.
But the truth is, it's the imperfections, the raw edges. Those are the things that make our stories relatable. People connect with authenticity, not with, airbrushed perfection.
So it's about letting go of that need to impress.
Yeah.
And just sharing our truth, even if it's messy.
Absolutely.
The source brings up one final point that I think is worth thinking about, this idea of balancing authenticity with intentionality.
Ooh, that's interesting. It's a delicate balance, right? Authenticity means being true to ourselves, to our experiences, but intentionality means thinking about the impact we want our story to have. What do we want to say? What feeling do we want to evoke? It's about being mindful of both our truth and our purpose.
It's like being a chef. You use real ingredients, but you combine them with intention to create a dish that's both delicious and nourishing.
That's a great analogy.
Well, we've covered so much in this part of our deep dive, from critical consumption to the healing power of sharing our stories, and this interplay of authenticity and intentionality.
Yeah, it's been a really rich conversation.
It has, and we're not done yet.
Nope.
In our final part, we'll explore how understanding the mechanics of storytelling can help us craft better narratives and use this tool to make a real impact on the world. So stay tuned. Welcome back to the deep dive. This has been one of the most thought-provoking deep dives yet, I gotta say.
Yeah.
I'm already I catch myself paying more attention to the stories around me now.
That's great.
Thanks to all these insights.
It's amazing how, once you start looking for stories, you realize they're everywhere.
Yeah.
They shape our news, our entertainment, even just, everyday conversations.
Yeah.
And as we talked about, that awareness, it's so important these days.
It is. We've talked about, the why of storytelling, how it impacts us emotionally, all that. Even being mindful, consumers of stories.
Right.
But this last batch of stuff, it's really focusing on how to become better storytellers ourselves.
Right. And it's a skill that anyone can develop,
Yeah.
One article breaks it down, what makes a good story.
Okay.
Clear structure, relatable characters, emotional arc.
Okay.
Sounds simple, but there's a real art to it.
Yeah, let's unpack that a bit. What makes for like a clear structure? I feel like I've heard stories that just kind of wander around.
Yeah.
It's hard to stay engaged.
Think of it like a journey, right?
Okay.
You need a starting point, a destination, and some interesting stops along the way. Whether it's like that classic hero's journey or something totally different, the listener needs to know where the story's going.
Right. Or they get lost.
Exactly.
And what about relatable characters? For me, if I don't care about the characters,
Yeah.
I zone out.
Characters are the heart of the story, for sure. They don't have to be perfect.
Right.
In fact, flaws make them more relatable, right?
Yeah.
What matters is that they feel real.
Mm.
Like, their motivations make sense. We don't have to agree with their choices.
Yeah.
But we need to, like, be invested in what happens to them.
Be rooting for them.
Yeah, feel their ups and downs.
It's like they say, no conflict, no story.
Exactly.
You got to see the characters struggle, grow, make mistakes.
Yeah, just like us.
Just like we do. And speaking of emotional investment, the source talks about a strong emotional arc. What does that even mean?
It's about how the character changes over the course of the story.
Okay.
Like maybe they start out naive and end up wise, or they start cynical and learn to trust again. It's that transformation that gives the story depth.
Okay.
Makes us think about our own journeys.
And it doesn't have to be like a positive transformation, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes a character, they make bad choices
Right.
and end up in a worse place,
Yeah.
but that can still be a powerful story.
Oh, absolutely. Tragedy can be just as impactful as triumph.
Yeah.
Sometimes even more so.
Right.
It's about making the listener feel something, even if it's like uncomfortable.
So we've got structure, characters, emotional arc, but the source keeps coming back to authenticity. It's like the secret sauce.
It's tricky, though, because it's subjective, right?
Yeah.
What feels authentic to one person might feel fake to someone else.
Right.
But generally, I think it's about being true to your own voice, your own experiences. Don't try to be someone you're not.
Yeah, it's like those musicians who try to sound like everyone else,
Right.
and they get lost.
Exactly. The ones who stand out are the ones who embrace what makes them different.
Totally. And the source also acknowledges, sharing our stories can be scary.
Oh, for sure.
It takes guts to be vulnerable.
It does. We all have that inner critic telling us we're not good enough, our stories aren't interesting enough.
Mm-hmm.
But honestly, one of the most powerful things we can do is share them anyway.
Right.
Even if it's just with someone we trust, starting small can build our confidence.
It's like anything else, practice makes progress.
Exactly.
And speaking of progress, the source really encourages focusing on connection over perfection.
Oh, yeah. Perfectionism can be so paralyzing. We get so caught up in wanting everything to be perfect and we never actually do anything.
Right.
Stories, like life, are messy,
Right.
Embrace the imperfections, the stumbles, the detours. Those are often the parts that make a story really connect.
It's like that Japanese art, kintsugi. Have you heard of that?
Yeah.
Where they repair broken pottery with gold.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, the flaws become part of the beauty.
I love that.
And a final point, the source talks about balancing authenticity with intentionality.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, it's kind of a tricky balance, right?
It is. We want to stay true to ourselves, our experiences, but we also want to think about the impact our story might have on others. What are we trying to say? How do we want people to feel?
It's like choosing the right tool for the job.
Yeah.
A hammer's great for nails, but not so much for screws.
Exactly.
Got to be mindful of our purpose and choose our approach, accordingly.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, from the science of why stories work to tips on how to tell them better.
It's been quite a journey.
It has. What's the one thing you hope our listener walks away with?
If I had to pick one thing, it would be this. Stories are not just entertainment. They're fundamental to, to being human.
Mm-hmm.
We're all storytellers, whether we realize it or not. The more we understand that power, the more we can use it to connect, to inspire, to heal, to make the world a better place.
That's beautifully said. And to you, dear listener, what stories are waiting to be told inside you? What impact will you make with your unique voice? We hope this deep dive has given you, the knowledge and the inspiration to embrace your own storytelling journey.
Yeah, go tell your stories.
Until next time, happy storytelling.